Welcome to Take the Lead Radio with Dr. Diane Hamilton, where she interviews some of the most successful leaders, entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, and other individuals who will inspire you to take the lead in your career and personal life. And now, here is Dr. Diane Hamilton.
I am here with Giles Hutchins, who's the chairman of the Future Fit Leadership Academy, leader partner of the Natural Business Partnership, and co-founder of BCI Biomimicry for Creative Innovation. He is a prolific writer, speaker, advisor. He does a lot of things. He's served on the Global Sustainability Director for Atos. I want to make sure it's Atos. I want to make sure I get that right. And previously a management consultant with KPMG, and has helped transform a wide range of organizations, corporate, third sector, public sector, and startup. He regularly guest lectures at leading universities and business schools. You've seen him probably on the BBC. He writes articles for many leading networks, and he's author of several books, The Nature of Business, The Illusion of Separation, and Future Fit. So it's so nice to have you here.
It's a pleasure, Diane. It really is.
Well, it's very interesting because I was watching your work and I liked your TED Talk a lot. I mean, it was very fascinating to me to discuss the illusion of separation. And do you mind going into that? I mean, I know you probably are asked this a lot, but I'm very interested in how you say that there's an optical delusion. Is that how you put it?
Yeah, well, actually, Albert Einstein, very insightful man, as well as a great scientist, was essentially, a genius. And he noticed that a big problem with certainly modern humanity, our consciousness, is that we've kind of created this delusion where we think we're separate from each other, and that creates all sorts of problems for ourselves. And so, what I tried to do in The Illusion of Separation is explore the reasons that created that sense of separateness within ourselves, within our psychology, and what sort of problems that's creating for society, for business in particular, and for leadership.
So how do we dispel the illusion of separateness in business then?
Well, first, I think it's worth us knowing that as we talk about in leadership development, that we're at different sort of stages of ego development. And that can be, some of them can be related to the country we're in, to the upbringing we have, to our own life experiences, to the way we're showing up in the moment, So it's not a sort of one-off, it's kind of breathing in and out all the time. We can have certain triggers that pull us back, or certain situations that open us out. And essentially it's our opening, our permeating our sense of self with others, with life, with nature, with how the world really is. And that shifting consciousness, or seeing the world more as it truly is something that really is the essence of leadership development, and is also the essence of organizational development. But today, we actually treat the organization as a machine, and we want to sweat assets for short-term returns. And actually that kind of stifles our human development and stifles the opportunity for the organization to really unfold our potential as human beings, and the organization to realize its greater potential.
So does it go beyond just having silos? I'm sure, I don't know if you've read the book, The Silo Effect, but that was popular for good reason. We're seeing a lot of silos. Does it go beyond, how does it go beyond that, I guess, is my question.
Yes. So yes, Julian's book on silos and silo busting was, is great. So that's part of the machine mentality. When we start moving out of the machine mentality, we start challenging the barriers that we've put in place. Silos, top-down hierarchies, supply chains, all of that, we start questioning and realizing that actually, for instance, that there's value webs, there's relationships that are happening with society, with the environment, with different parts of the silos. And there's also relationships happening beyond the organization with all sorts of different stakeholder communities. And the more that we allow people to work across those silos, the more we get inspiration, we get diversity in perspective, and that enables us to adapt more readily to the increasing volatility and change that's happening in the world. So silos, great for kind of machine mentality, great perhaps for a Fordist approach, but not really serving us anymore for the kind of fast-moving, disruptive world that we're now in.
Well, I've taught so many business courses, I mean, more than 1,000, and they all, have their different aspects of leadership, HR, different things I teach. And a lot of what comes up is when you try to do cross training or have people away from their jobs learning this, doing that, there gets to be an expense involved. How do you deal with that? How do you prove ROI and on kind of a fuzzy kind of thing? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I've been on my own journey with that really, because I used to be, mainstream. I ran a practice in KPMG with a number of consultants, and very much everything was about ROI and creating value as it should be. And then I was global head of sustainability, and again, it was the business case for sustainability, etc. Since I've left corporate life, I've really gone much deeper, and I'm fortunate, I think, in working with. I tend to only work with leaders who are already on the cusp of really getting it. So they're already, whether for their own ego stage of development or a desire to make change happen in their organizations, they're already kind of looking beyond the pure business case. They know they have to change, and that they know they need to change in a fundamentally different way than the business case actually, even measures.
Right.
So, actually, we're in a funny situation at the moment. The very situation we've created with this mindset, with this separateness, is actually creating the very situation that might just wake us up out of the separateness. And that could be anything from Trumpism right the way through to fragmentation, polarization in politics, through to in the organization becoming more and more under pressure to make change happen and to deal with change in a fast-moving way, whilst also people in the organization, I think there's more and more people now who are looking for a deeper sense of purpose, for a deeper, to be part of something that really gives value to themselves, to their children, to the people that they work with. And therefore there's a pulling forward as well as a kind of push that's forcing us to be more adaptive. There's a pull that's actually encouraging us to search into what does it really mean to be human? What is our real purpose as an organization?
Well, I'm curious, since your beautiful accent, you're obviously not from the United States. How is it different there in England versus United States? Are you seeing any big differences, or is this kind of just worldwide problem?
I think it is a worldwide problem. And I think actually many of the disruptions that we're seeing are ways of showing what's going on in the unconscious within us all, the subconscious within us all. So some things that people might find abhorrent or that are a real challenge are actually opportunities for aspects to become more visible, whether that be racism or sexism, and that actually as they come out, they're kind of displaying something that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be addressed. So we see that happening. The challenge comes when we deal with that with fear, where we actually polarize. For instance, we then blame immigration or we blame X, Y, Z. Then we get into fear and we're still in separateness. If we can reach beyond through empathy, through really being able to see the deeper problems that lie beneath, then there's an opportunity that these challenges happen worldwide for us to start evolving. What I found in Europe is, I think partly because of our social democratic background over the last sort of 15, 20 years, we're quite fortunate that there is, especially in Scandinavia, in Denmark, in Netherlands, in Sweden and so forth, and also a bit in Germany, you find that there's quite a lot of senior business leaders who know that it's not just about making the organization more adaptive, that it's actually about making the organization something that we're proud to work in and that we want to be a part of, and that in some way creates the conditions that are beneficial for the next generation. Now that's a step change. That requires us to then start looking out of our bubble, looking out of the kind of separateness, and actually start questioning, how does this organization relate with society, relate with the environment? And that's beyond sustainability, it's beyond measuring, monitoring, controlling, reducing, into actually, how do we interrelate? What is our purpose?
Well, when you're talking about purpose, I mean, millennials are known for wanting to make a difference. Is this a lot of this coming from because of the millennials focus, or is it coming from something else?
I think it's happening across all generations, actually. A lot of people who come on I do deep nature immersion. So I take small groups of leaders, amongst other things, out into nature, and we create in the environment for them to have profound shifts and to start seeing beyond that illusion of separateness, and then bring that back into practical ways of what does that mean for their organization. And many of the people who come on my immersions are 50, 60 year olds who have gone through changes in their life, who have gone through their own thresholds of growth and development, who are now thinking, well, what can I give back? What can I create for a legacy in my organization and in my environment? That said, I'm also doing a learning journey in Sweden with a group of much younger, kind of 30-somethings, who are very much just get this. You know, they're not prepared to deal with the current mindset that perhaps you and I have had to deal with over the last 30 years in business.
Right.
They're just not prepared to deal with that. And they think, well, there must be something better. And so when we talk about regenerative leadership and about creating the conditions conducive for life in our organizations, they just innately get it. So I agree with you. I think it is partly to do with millennials. And yet I also feel that the older generations, if you can touch their humanity, if you can create the right environment for them to see it, everybody wants it. Everybody wants to become more human. We want to reach across our fears. We know that we can do better than we're currently doing, I think.
Well, you know, it's interesting because I was on a panel this week with a bunch of CEOs, and we were talking about having difficult conversations. And some of it is the millennial, boomer, Gen X, just the conflicts of trying to all come up with this, you know, an end goal that makes everybody happy and communicates in a way that makes everybody happy. And, you know, I've done a lot of research in emotional intelligence for my doctoral dissertation, and you mentioned empathy earlier. How do we develop a good sense of empathy? In the 50, 60-year-olds you're talking to, is it too late to get them to do this? I mean, how do we do that?
Well, first off, I believe as human beings, we are innately empathic. Mm-hmm. We are born innately empathic. That's a core quality of what it really means to be a human being. We're social, loving creatures, and that's what enables us to adapt and be creative in the way that we are in social communities. What we've done is then, for much of our lives, twisted ourselves down certain pathways for various economic and social reasons that actually warp that empathy. So our job in holding leading journeys for people is to help start allowing people to open up again through the armor that they've started to implement around themselves so they can just deal with the world. So I think it's a revealing back to something that's innate within us. So what I do, for instance, that's part of why I use nature. Being out in nature without the digital handheld for even 20 minutes with some simple embodiment practices, whether that be Tai Chi, Qigong, or just embodiment where we're focusing in on ourselves and we're starting to become aware of our gut and our heart as well as just our head, which we now know are powerful neural centers. But then we're starting to change the neurological structures. We're starting to change how the sympathetic and parasympathetic networks start to interrelate. We start to open up to more of our natural intelligences within ourselves, our intuitive, our emotional, our somatic intelligence, as well as our rational. And so what happens in a very short period of time, within half an hour of these busy people being in nature with me with some simple activities, they start opening up. And then we do some silent walking. And by the time we've got to sitting around the fire and some very simple practices about where they're at in their lives, so they start to share as a small group. Within an hour, sitting around the fire, these guys are opening up and they're creating a field. And I've done it now with enough groups, enough completely different groups with different people from different parts of the world, that they all say within about an hour and a half, oh my gosh, how come we are talking about deeply human things? What's happened? What's enabled us to do that? And I don't think it's anything more than really just being able to hold a space for people to feel safe, to really share.
Well, that's interesting. You're bringing me back to my pharmaceutical training with the parasympathetic, sympathetic discussion because I'm getting every day, you get that sympathetic system just slamming in with all the cortisol and all that. And it also reminded me of a book I read by James Patterson, Against Medical Advice, where this person, and it's actually a true story of this kid who had Tourette's and all these horrible medical issues. And what they found that helped him actually was not medicine. It was going out into nature. And it was a great book. If you haven't read it, I have to recommend it, because this poor guy was going through all this treatment trying to make him feel better, and everything just made him worse. And then actually nature did end up helping him. But you brought up a couple other things that I think are really interesting, because you talked about creativity being innate and certain things that we have that we just have twisted, what'd you say? Twisted down that from our natural state. And I'm writing a book about curiosity, because I think that we've done the same thing with curiosity, that we have a natural ability to be creative and curious. And how do we get back to our sense of natural curiosity that maybe we have twisted down, or somebody twisted down for us, or now we have this fear because we've experienced something in a negative way? What do you think about how important curiosity is, and how do we improve?
Yeah, totally. This is essentially a mindset shift, and a key part of that mindset shift is opening up to being curious to life, being curious to what a person's saying, being curious to why someone is having that particular point of view, rather than being in a kind of polarizing, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong, which is where, so the ego, if we want to use that expression, is what heightens. It gives us our sense of self, and it wants to protect us. And it sometimes then creates too much of a bubble around us, which creates that separateness. And what empathy does is enable us to start opening up, start permeating that bubble, so we can start interrelate with other people. So that mindset is about them being curious, is about inviting in, is about, rather than saying no but well, yes and just being generative and building on. It's about non-violent communication, deep listening, really listening to the person, rather than sort of already being in our, well, I've already made some judgments about what you're going to say and what your views are. And so all of this is very much, as you said, about emotional development and emotional intelligence. I'd say that then, as we open up more, and this is where, deep nature, you can have vision quests, you can have people having silent time for 12 hours and so forth, as well as, having practical experiences of exploring what's going on in our organization. Then I think what happens is people start opening up. And you could argue it's not just an emotional shift, but there's also a kind of psycho-spiritual shift that's happening, where the sense of self and the sense of purpose changes. And this is where, as I say, it's different. This is to be dealt with at school, at university, when you're a young millennial, but also at all levels. Because actually, when you're older, you have the opportunity to then bring in your wisdom and actually reflect on different stages of your life. One of the meditations I take people through is actually to take them through the stages of their life, all the way through to the point of their death, and to really sense into who's actually going to be there at your funeral, and who are these people gathering at your funeral, and what are they saying about you, about your legacy, about how you touched their lives, and what would you like them to say about you? So you can start sensing into the kind of person that you are, and the kind of person that you would like to be. So it's challenging. It can be very challenging for people. I run some sessions on a big leadership program in one of the mainstream global business schools, and often people cry. But this is all part of holding a safe space where people feel it's okay to cry. These are senior people from different businesses that have never really met each other before, but they feel okay to start sharing their emotions. And when they do, other people then start opening up as well. And then before we know it, everybody is just sharing about who they are, and about, oh my gosh, I'm noticing how I am with my children. I'm noticing how I am with the people at work. I'm starting to think about how I need to take on a daily practice so I can become more aware, more evolved. And it's, we don't teach this at school, unfortunately, because we should be doing, of course. We teach the opposite, which is how to be distracted. how to put your head in the book, how to focus on an exam that you're never going to use again, how to break things down into metrics. And so we're dealing with the engineering side, which was great for the industrial age, but it's not equipping us for who we truly are as social beings in a fast-moving world.
Yeah, this is so important. When I would review the MBA program, when I was the MBA program chair, I made a lot of notes about how we're teaching a lot of STEM, but not enough soft skills. And a lot of this falls into the soft skills area. And I think that there's so much focus in business on creating value for shareholders, stakeholders, and just one direction. And then I was interested in your video. You were talking about you're seeing more B Corp companies going that direction. Can you just share a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the focus shifting of, how we look at profit and success for a company?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think there's many models that look at different consciousness within business, but a particularly well-accepted model in business is one of spiral dynamics, and Claire Graves' work that actually came out of America in the 70s and 80s and then got developed by Don Beck, Christopher Cohen, and popularized by Ken Wilber and others. And they talk of this sort of orange mean. So that's your kind of capitalistic, very much business first, for profit, maximizing shareholder value. And that's where the organization is a machine. There is innovation, there's creativity, but only if it's maximizing profit. And I think that there's then a shift that goes into what Spiral Dynamics calls the green mean, where there's a much more understanding of the organization as a kind of family, where actually we can nurture people within and we can develop emotional intelligence and so forth. And that helps develop the culture, the values, the stakeholder value. And so you have people like Michael Porter in the US talking about shared value, about how we create value for society through the solutions that we offer. And that's where sustainability comes in and the triple bottom line. But what we then see after that is a big step into tier 2 consciousness, which goes into things like teal and turquoise, where you have quite a radical step. I mean, Claire Graves talked about it being a different human being because the brain, the neurological pathways change. Your whole sense of purpose changes. The whole way you see the world changes, which is this reflection on what Albert Einstein referred to as you kind of go beyond this delusion into actually changing your relationship with reality. And what we're seeing in Europe, in North America, in other parts of the world is more and more people, individuals, departments within organizations, and also organizations starting to embrace that tier 2 consciousness. So it doesn't mean to say that within that organization, you still don't have orange behaviors. You still don't have mechanistic, purely focused on short-term profit maximization, or you don't have your kind of culture, eat strategy for breakfast concept as well. But you have more. You have more going on. You have a recognition that actually each of us needs to take responsibility for our own learning journeys. Each of us needs to be able to show up at work in a more whole way, that we need to create environments that actually encourage us to bring more of ourselves to work, more of who we really are, because in doing that, we become more curious, we become more creative. We bring all of our natural capacities come online. We have a far greater level of energy in the workplace, which is what we need. But it's not just for the workplace. It's not just for maximizing profits. The very mission of the business changes. And this is where B Corps is part of that movement. And there's also the purpose movement. There's also, the whole teal evolutionary movement. Big movements are exponentially rising. What we see is that organizations are going, well, hang on a minute. I'm not just here to maximize profit. Profit is purely a vehicle for me to be able to invest back in and to pay the people so that we can deliver on this mission that we have. What are we as entrepreneurs, what are we as creative business people really getting together for? We're here to create value in some way. And that real value needs to enhance society and the environment and the economy. It can't just be maximizing for ourselves, but actually creating all sorts of problems. That's just a bizarre situation to be in. So you start tackling, when you get into that level of consciousness, you start questioning everything before, and you start realizing that actually much of current business that we've been brought up in is quite perverse, is toxic to our human being, our way of attending, and toxic to life itself. And so then you start questioning the whole paradigm. It's quite a big shift.
It is interesting to see the shift. And I know I've had a lot of people on my show who've talked about how leaders see themselves, that people see them in a certain way, and they're afraid that someday they're going to be exposed for not really knowing as much as they seem like they should know. I'm sure you probably run into that a lot. And I think it's good that you're opening up this dialogue to, that there's other ways to be successful. We have to look at these things and discuss these things and not just have this pretense of what we're supposed to be. Do you agree with that? Or
Definitely. And it requires courage from the leader, because, and this doesn't have to be just the CEO, a leader could be anyone in the organization really, that has the courage to actually create, to have a courageous conversation with someone. So this isn't just giving feedback. This is actually creating a space where two people can really talk and really share. I mean, there's a client I've got near here in the UK where they now have, in their new offices, they have a couple of different rooms where people can either go just to have some quiet time, or to go and breastfeed or express, or to just share with a colleague in a very open way. And then there's a bigger room where people can sit in circle and share with a talking stick and actually speak and listen from the heart in a small group in half an hour. Speaking in that way, you cover far more and you open up all the stuff that's going on underneath. And so what happens is the whole organization starts to be able to move more quickly, move more in a more flowing, more enlivened way, because you're not pulling people, you're not forcing people. People are enlivened. So it is good business as well. I mean, there's a study that's being produced, actually came out of some North Americans, that actually recorded over 20-year periods, companies that embrace this living systems approach, and they consistently outperform their mechanistic counterparts. So it's also good for business. It's good for shareholder value.
Well, I think that's a great place to end, because I think that's an optimistic outlook, and I think that you're doing some amazing work. And I loved your videos, and I thought your work is really inspiring, and I think a lot of people could learn a lot from watching them and finding out more about you. Can you share your links and how people could find out more?
Yeah, I can send you my TEDx link. I also have a blog, which is www.thenatureofbusiness.org. So you can go on there, and there's a Facebook community as well, The Nature of Business. And you can find me on LinkedIn. So thank you very much, Diane. Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, well, you're welcome. This has been so much fun.